Haven't you read that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female and said, "For this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate." Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because your hearts were hard, but it was not this way from the beginning. I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another woman commits adultery. God is the heavenly parent of vertical true love. Had Adam and Eve grown to maturity and fulfilled God's will, they would have become the horizontal parents. They would have stood in the position of the parents of horizontal true love. These two sets of parents would meet at a 90-degree angle, the crossroads of love.
So I'm starting with this quote of Jesus that Christy read, because the part I'm focusing on there is that in that quote, Jesus, when he's talking about divorce, he said to the people, Moses permitted it, but it wasn't that way in the beginning. So if it wasn't that way in the beginning, what was it in the beginning? What way was it? Isn't that what we want to know? Jesus didn't really bring it all out, or whoever wrote, Mark, Matthew, they didn't really write it all out for us. So therefore, in the second quote, our true Father is talking about the crossroads of love and explaining that our heavenly parent gives us vertical love, which includes the plan that was in the beginning. And then our own parents, our father and mother in this world, give us horizontal love. We need both. And it was God's, the heavenly parent, desire that Adam and Eve be the ones to begin that tradition of making the foundation for both to be with us in our lives. So, again, if we look back to what there was in the beginning, there was God, there was one man, there was one woman, and there was the briefest of plans, which was simply the commandment not to eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And the whole story, that we have studied many times. But it's pretty simple, isn't it? God, a man, a woman, and the direction to go in, the path to follow to arrive at the destination, where their lives is filled with God's love. Vertically speaking, they have a relationship of love with God, and horizontally, they love one another as a couple, which they were meant to become. So one God and one spouse and kind of one plan. Just really, really simple. If they could have gone that way, and they would have then established the crossroads of love, where God's love and their love were present, and therefore the children would be delighted and happy to live in that world of love, and the grandchildren, and so on. So wonderful things could develop on that foundation, a world of peace, of goodness, and everybody could be happy. And that was exactly why God created it that way. And Jesus was trying to explain to them, this is not the way it should be, where there's divorces, where you divorce your wife because Moses said it was okay. That's not at all the ideal. He was speaking to the men in the community, the patriarchs of the community. So, in the original world, at that crossroads of love, you're surrounded by love every which way you turn. Could you make a wrong direction if everywhere you go is love? It's really difficult to. In such a way, God's plan was that everyone would be protected by the love that was present around them in their community and their families, everywhere. So I feel that's what Father's reading was that we read today. The vertical love, the horizontal love meet. That's the crossroads of love. That's where everybody wants to be. That's what we're seeking. But of course, if you go back and you read the story in Genesis in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, the first people, didn't do that. They didn't find those crossroads of love. They lost the way. They kind of, you could say, took a wrong turn. They didn't go the way that they were meant to go. And as a result, their conscience, their morality, the things that they gave to their children, upbringing, was very different from what God intended. And it created a world of chaos, of confusion, of lack of conscience, of lack of peace, and all the things that God intended were no longer there. So history has been a history of war and divorce and fighting on every level. So then all this bad result has to be straightened out by God, the Heavenly Parent, because it's their headache. It's God's headache that this kind of world exists. And we all have our own kind of different standards of what's right and wrong. Even in our church today, the person sitting next to you, and it might even be your spouse, they have a different standard of what exactly is right and wrong. Right? You sometimes maybe argue even with your spouse about the way that you take when you come to those, when you're trying to make a decision. You want to be right, but you both have a different idea of what that is. It's the result of the fall. So I was reading not so long ago, and I think I mentioned it to you in one of my sermons because I'm so fond of this story. I was mentioning to you about the book that was, and the movie, No Country for Old Men. I felt like it's such an amazing book. I know it's violent. I'm not promoting that book, but in this story of drugs and money and death, it's the fallen world. But in the midst of all this, there's a sheriff. There's a sheriff who has a strong conscience. His father was a sheriff, a man who would put his life on the line for the sake of the law. And he did it, and he lost it. But his son kept the tradition alive. He was a sheriff. Many in his family, relatives, were sheriffs. And all through this story, this sheriff who's encountering something he never encountered before is trying to figure out what am I going to do? Because he never had such illegal things, terrible things going on in his town where just no way to figure it out. People were dying because they came in they found themselves in the wrong place at the right time simply because something so terrible was going on in that community, a big drug deal that went south. And so I've got to read that to you because it's such a wonderful attempt on his part to understand how to deal with the situation. He was at a crossroads, but it was a crossroads of a different kind. He was trying to understand, what am I going to do? I have to put this microphone down for a second to get to that quote. So, towards the end of the book, when the story's kind of unfolded the whole way, he's meeting it with his wife over breakfast, and he's explaining to her about two dreams. The second dream is the one I'm going to read to you, what happened to him. He said the second one, it was like we were, this is his way of saying English, he's from Texas. We was both back in older times, and I was on horseback, going through the mountains of a night. Going through this pass in the mountains. It was cold and snowing and hard riding and hard country. And he's speaking about his father. He rode past me and he kept on going. And he never said nothing. He just kept on going by. He just rode on past, and he had this blanket wrapped around him, and his head was down, And when he rode past, I seen he was carrying fire in a horn, the way people used to do. And I could see the horn from the light inside it, about the color of the moon. And in the dream, I knew that he was going on ahead and that he was fixing to make a fire somewhere out there in all that dark and all that cold. And I knew that whenever I got there, he would be there, up there ahead. And then I woke up. And I had to read that to you because this sheriff has been struggling all through the book, trying to figure out, how am I going to deal with things? And he finally went through the crossroads of, like in English language, we say, when I'm at the crossroads, you're trying to make a decision. You're trying to figure out, what the heck am I going to do? And he decided, I'm going to retire, because he felt an old man. And he couldn't deal with these things anymore. So in the dream, he felt like when he saw his father and his father went on up ahead, his father was in the spirit world, and he felt like his time was to go there soon too. So I'm just going to retire from this business. That's why the title of the book is No Country for Old Men. At some point in life, it gets to be too much, right? He couldn't handle it. So the question of how we decide things is what I wanted to talk about today. And you know, this is also such a wonderful day because we're celebrating Martin Luther King's birthday, aren't we? This week. Wonderful events that we were at just yesterday, celebrating young people who were doing things in this Portland community, and the salute to greatness. But Dr. King, you know, he was someone who was trying to deal with a very difficult situation in our country. Earlier, I was talking about what's right and what's wrong, and our own consciousness tell us different things. Well, he had a very strong sense of what he felt was right and wrong, and he had a strong calling. But many times he found himself at the crossroads. He had young people, younger men than him, that said, we can't take this stuff any longer. We can't be nonviolent. You know, we've got to fight fire with fire, and we're getting killed for what we believe in. But Dr. King always, you know, spoke wisely to those young men who wanted to fight, and he said, no, we're going to do this nonviolently from beginning to end. Even though the risk was so great, he even lost his life as still relatively a young man in that effort to help the conscience of America overcome this dark history that we had of slavery and the aftermath of it. So we celebrate Dr. King because many times at the crossroads, he advised the way to go, and it kept peace, and it brought finally success. So truly, we recognize Dr. King as an amazing man for what he did. Well, when we ask our own selves the questions in our own life, what am I going to do? I know. I've been talking to people in this community, especially this last week or two. So many people have decisions that they're on the verge of making, and it's so difficult to make that decision because you don't always know, what road should I take? Should I go straight ahead? Should I go to the left? Should I go to the right? Should I stay where I am? What should I do? It's so difficult sometimes making decisions. You know, there's all kinds of common wisdom about what you can do, you know, to make a decision. You can put your pros and cons in two lists, weigh them out. You know, you can pray, of course. Prayer is always the very, very best thing to do. But God doesn't always just speak to each one of us. That's sometimes somewhat rare, isn't it, that God speaks to us? Very rare. So we have to find our own way many times. How do you do that? Well, if you have a question about something, like if you're a French student, I mean, you're studying the French language, and you have a question about that. Who do you go to? Would you go to someone who only speaks English or Arabic? That wouldn't be so wise, would it? You should go to someone who speaks the French language if you have a question about its usage. Or if there's a book, consult it, a language book. So, of course, what I'm saying to you is kind of common knowledge. But we sometimes don't think so carefully. When we're thinking about important matters like love, with boyfriends, girlfriends, engagements, spouses, who do we talk to? We often just talk to someone who actually isn't a very good choice. Someone who maybe isn't the right person to talk to about it, because they themselves don't have success in that area. Why would we talk to them then and ask them a deep question about it? We need to talk to someone who can really help us. Parents, somebody in the clergy, a chaplain, a professor, somebody who knows and can really help. People that you really trust who will give you the right advice, not just anyone. In the Bible, in the book of Jeremiah the prophet said, when you go to the crossroads, seek the path of wisdom. Seek the ancient path, which will guide you in the right way. It's important to really be wise when you're making decisions. I want to go back now a little bit to where I was at the beginning. I was talking about the commandment because I want to show the process more clearly of making that kind of decision when you're at the crossroads. When you think about that original commandment that the first ancestors had, may I ask you, what was the purpose for that commandment? What was the long-term purpose of that commandment? I believe it was to protect the family. It wasn't there yet, but God knew it was coming. A family that would include children, grandchildren, and quite an amazing future of lots and lots of nations, maybe at some point even worlds. So God wanted to protect the family. Children need two parents. That's the ideal. Children need two parents, and true parents too at the same time. So how could that happen? How could there be a way in which the families were truly protected? Well, if husband and wife stayed together, if they loved one another, centered on God, if they created a good family structure, and as time developed, there were aunts and there were uncles and there were communities and societies and nations of such people, wouldn't families naturally be protected? But if that original true family wasn't established, it would be easy for anything to happen. We know that in that first family, one brother kills the other. That's how bad it was. Brothers killing brothers within their family. What about when you're in different families? It's even easier, isn't it, to go to war with another tribe or another family? Well, they did that to us. And, that's how the Hatfields and the McCoys got into their fight that lasted generations. I don't even know if today it's still over. Or Israel and its neighbors. It's a never-ending battle. Both sides feel they're right. So I believe that commandment was there to protect the family so that the higher and higher levels of goodness and ideals could be created. That's the only reason that commandment was there. So from God's point of view, the world that was to be created was a world of true love. That commandment would protect true love and protect true families. So I believe, I'm coming to my conclusion now, I believe that what process when we're making a decision about what to do, when we're at the crossroads, the question we should ask ourselves, maybe most deeply, is in what way can true love develop from the decision I'm making? How can I become a better person in my relationship with God in the decision that I'm making? What would God want me to do? Would he want me to take this way or this way? Will this way help me and my family and my community and relatives, my country, or will this way? That, asking God what God would want me to do, but also on the horizontal level, which is there, asking other people. Ask your wife, your spouse, your husband, what would you want me to do? Your children, let them be a part of the decision. It's good to hear their opinion. Your grandparents. Anybody that you trust enough to talk with them about it, to help you make your decision. But always, I feel like first and foremost, we should be thinking about the ideal of true love, the settlement of true love, because that is the place where we want to be, where we want to live, where we want to share together with one another. So, we face many problems. We often find ourselves at the crossroads. We often don't know how to make that decision. But the decision has to be made. So it's best to think deeply about the realm of true love and how our decision affects it. And then, once you decide, you can go forward with a clear conscience and feel confident that you're making the right decision. And then the pathway becomes so much better. If you second guess yourself, I shouldn't have done that, it's a regret that you'd rather not have there, right? So, I have to read one more thing for you, and then I can't, don't let me forget that joke, okay? I have one more thing. Put this back. Need 2 hands to do this. This is a quote from the book Traveling Light. Traveling Light. The author writes, "You may not remember the time you let me go first, or the time you dropped back to tell me it wasn't that far to go, or the time you waited at the crossroads for me to catch up. You may not remember any of these, but I do. And this is what I have to say to you today. Today, no matter what it takes, we ride together." You know, I'm reminded of the ideal of Chunoguk. We know that in those words, right? Something about that, if we could understand that language, is two becoming one. Chunoguk. So to go together on this path, isn't it always the best way? So we were talking at the beginning of this year being the year of balance. I really want to encourage you to make effort to unite with those around you, with your spouse, with your neighbors, with your co-workers. Find that path that you can go together on it. And I think things will be better. So, in conclusion, you know, we were talking about the crossroads of love being the place where God's love is present and the love of our spouse and our community is present. That is the corner that we want to live on, I believe. One street, maybe we can call it Love Street. The other street is also a street of love. Maybe maybe we call it the path of love, but those two intersect somewhere. It's important to us to find that place and to settle there and to live together with our brothers and sisters, with our community. Make that our goal in this year. We may not get there in this year, but we can get closer. As we make our decisions at each of those crossroads, we need to be getting closer to the final crossroads we want to get to, which is the crossroads of true love.